any small children? Are there any individuals who have special needs? Elderly people, okay, elderly residents. We need to know that information because in the event of some type of emergency, and I know this will happen in a fire department comes in, they're going to want to know, who can't get down, or if there is an evacuation, who needs help. By the way, you're supposed to stay in your apartment when there's a fire unless directed by the fire department. That's in fireproof buildings. In combustible buildings, there are fire escapes, and that's what you need to use to get out. Anyway, last thing on communication before I move on, I think that how does the fire department and OEM interact with management companies in these situations, and I think you sort of alluded to that before, and I don't know if there's anything else to add.
Well, we, as you mentioned, Dan, we both, OEM and fire, would love to come to your buildings, speak to your residents at night when people are home from work, hand out some of our literature that explains a lot of the things that we'll talk about today. And it's just not a one-shot deal. You can't do it and then think you're going to remember it 5 years later. It should be an annual thing. It should be a reminder to the residents how to keep safe, what to do in case of a fire, what type of building you live in, where your exits are, all things that are planned ahead. And if we never had to do it in a building where we had a fire, that would be a good thing. But unfortunately, we do go to fires. So let us come into your buildings. Let us explain to your residents how to keep safe, and we'll all be better off for it.
Sure. Just to add to that, and I'm glad to see the document that you guys have developed. But we also have a workbook that the city's produced called Ready New York. It's a toolkit that anyone can take to walk through and develop their own personal plan for themselves and for their family, and then keep on hand to reference during an emergency. I have several copies here, but certainly if anyone wants to order them you want to order it for your building, feel free to call 311. You can ask them for the Ready New York material, or go to our website and just order it for your facility. Or again, invite us, as the commissioner said. We're happy to come out and do presentations and talk to folks to revisit these challenges.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I want to talk about fires. And obviously, Commissioner, this is going to be directed to you initially, but what are the main causes of residential high-rise fires, and what can be done to prevent them?
Well, first of all, make sure you have a smoke alarm, working smoke alarm, and a working carbon monoxide alarm. And the causes for residential fires are no different, for high-rise residential fires are no different than they are for private dwellings. Smoking, cooking carelessness, overloaded electrical outlets, things, the same causes in low-rise and high-rise, they're all the same. But again, how can you prevent them? Just by careful education, your family, people that visit you. Again, make sure you don't overload your outlets. Make sure that you are very careful in your cooking. Make sure that if you happen to smoke, you smoke prudently, not on a stuffed chair, not in bed, things like that, and you'll be safe. But again, the number one detector, a working smoke detector, will cause an early notification to you and to the fire department as well.
Okay. Ari, you want to...
Just one thing that I just would like to add, and that is, you mentioned before, Dan, the importance of having a plan, but making sure that everyone knows about it. Mm-hmm. And over the past several years, when we've had the opportunity to talk to individuals, especially families who live in apartments, and we encourage them to know their plan and to practice the plan with their family. It's key. Don't just talk about it, but make sure that every single person in the family knows where they're supposed to go and what they're supposed to do. Especially, and I can't speak for the fire department, but I know when first responders show up and they're going to speak to a wife and say, okay, you just came out of your apartment. Yep. Who was there? And the wife says, I was in there with my husband. I have no idea where he is, because quite frankly, the conversations we've had, I asked a wife, where do you plan on going if there's an emergency? And she said she's going to go downstairs and out to the left. There's a house of worship down the block, and that's where she was going to go to. And I asked the husband, who was in the audience at the same time. I said, what would you do during an emergency? And he said he was planning to go down and to the right. There was a bar. He was going to go get a beer. but the reality is, it sounds funny now, but in that moment, that could be very dangerous for the firefighters, the fire department, the first responders who are looking for somebody. So make sure everyone knows what their plan is. They're on the same page.
Okay. Now, from a management perspective, we have a responsibility in this process as well. When a property manager visits a building, or if it's an on-site situation, they're constantly walking through the building, and they need to check certain things. All right, they need to make sure that the doors to the stairwells are self-closing. Critically important. They need to make sure that the fire extinguishers are up to date and tagged. When there are renovations going on, we have to make sure, especially with kitchen renovations, and when there's electrical work that's done, that they are inspected by certified professionals. And in many cases, buildings have their own engineer who will go through any type of apartment renovation and confirm that the conditions that are in the plans are being built to spec and nobody's taking any shortcuts. Excuse me. There are other, sort of administrative parts to this. Many buildings, the staff will have certificates of fitness for standpipe, for sprinkler, for machinery like boiler, air conditioning. These things need to be confirmed that they're up to date. And again, this is something that management needs to do to just help this. I mean, this is a real team effort here, and everyone needs to pitch in. So residents need to pitch in, management needs to pitch in, board members need to pitch in. We need to get information from the fire department, from OEM, all real important stuff. I think if you take one of those processes out, you then create a weak link. And when you have a weak link, then chances are that when things start to occur, when you have an emergency event, there's going to be a breakdown.
Dan, if I could, I just want to add one thing. And we found that many organizations, they focus perhaps on, the residents, or they focus maybe on some of the planning. I would stress that you should have conversations with the building staff, making sure that they're preparing at home for emergencies, because the reality is that you're going to require and you're going to expect them to be there, the engineers to be on site, and you're going to need them. And they're human beings. If their families are in danger, if their homes are impacted by a disaster, they could just as easily not be able to be at work. So the conversation you want to have about preparedness at home should extend to the staff and the people you expect you're going to need to help your buildings afterwards. Just an important aspect.
Actually, it's a terrific point. And that sort of leads into, I talked about this team effort. So now we have the board, we have management, and what can they be doing to work together, all right, to whatever needs to be done to help deal with potential emergency events. And I don't know if there's any clarity.
I think, I'm sorry, Dan, but as Ira said, the OEM has a great safety checklist. We've left one of these on every one of your chairs. This is from our fire safety education unit. It tells you what to do if there is a fire. It tells you what to do to prevent the fire. But on the back of it is a great checklist. It really is a great checklist. You should go home. You should go to your buildings, make sure that every one of your residents has one of these checklists and uses it. Because if you use this to prevent the fire, it's great. If you have a fire, it'll tell you what to do. But this is a good way to plan for the future. And it's just not a once-only thing. It should be done every year. It should be done annually. When you get your fire safety guides in the mail, you have to remember one has to be posted in a common area, and then one has to be posted on every apartment door. And I'm sure, as Dan said, when these notices come, they probably lay on the kitchen table with the bills and not get looked at, or if they do, they get looked at very cursory. But make sure that everybody knows that it's coming, it's in the mail, and continue to use it.
Okay, I'm going to show this little handy-dandy guide one more time because again, I want to reinforce this point. To have an emergency preparedness plan for your building is, again, it should be a non-negotiable, okay? You need to have it. And I'm just going to list for you what the areas of emergency preparedness are on this particular guide, just so you can get an understanding. robbery or mugging, power outage, threatening behavior, person trapped in elevator, poisoning, suspicious package, fire, heart attack, bomb threat, chemical spills, gas leaks, carbon monoxide, heat-related illness, suspected terrorist, first aid, shelter in place. Okay, that's pretty comprehensive, okay? And this takes a lot of time and planning, but it's so important that residents understand what to do in these issues. And I think part of the problem that we have is that when something does occur, people are, as and I've said this before, they just don't remember. The message has not been reinforced. The information is not readily available, and as a result, you know, you get to sort of a chaotic. You get yourself in a chaotic situation, or the building does, and people are running around not sure what to do. So, emergency preparedness really helps reduce the possibility of things going wrong in a crisis. And if you hold on, I know someone wants to ask a question. We're going to stop shortly and have a Q&A session. So it's really a great time to have the building staff conduct a hazard assessment, property managers regularly walking the buildings to assess and point out any potential hazards, repair or correct unsafe conditions and building violations, re-examine the building's safety systems, consider backup power. I mean, these are things that all go into play when you're putting together something like this. And this is the simple, short version. This is the longer version for some buildings that want it. And this is actually one for building staff. Okay, again, you have to communicate with anyone who's in your building. Your staff needs to know what to do in the event of an emergency, because a number of residents are going to go to them and say, hey, what do I do? And it would be very helpful if the resident manager, superintendent, security personnel, whoever it is, understands what needs to be done. I want to now turn to emergency equipment or systems in buildings that may not be legally required, but are recommended for high-rise residential buildings. For example, does the fire department recommend sprinkler systems if there isn't one in a building?
Absolutely. It's the greatest fire protection you can put in your building is a sprinkler system.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And additional fire extinguishers.
Additional extinguishers, but make sure people know how to use them. Make sure they have the proper extinguisher. That's another big help. It's a good first aid.
Okay. And then we've actually had inquiries, and I'm not going to answer this question, but fire alarms. All right. There's this whole notion out there that when there's a fire in a residential building, and let's say it's on the 10th floor, you know, should there be a ding or some sort of an alert system in a building to notify other residents that, you know, it's kind of like when we were in elementary school and we had a fire alarm and the bell went off and we all got up and we were like, hey, great, we're going to be out of class for about 20 minutes. So
in a perfect world, that would be great, but everything that we talk about does add expense to a building. You know, fire alarms are required in commercial buildings. They're required in hotels. But in residential buildings, I mean, if you are looking to put that kind of a system in, it would certainly benefit the department that you would have an early warning, but it's not required at this time.
okay. How about audio communication systems?
That would be a great tool to put in your building where you would have an intercom where we could actually give, you know, we had looked to do this in the latest code. It wasn't approved, but we are going to look to continue. If you can have an intercom in your building where somebody at the lobby can tell people what floor you're on, stay on that floor, don't exit, I mean, that's a great tool for us.
Okay. Thanks. So let me give you some suggestions that, from the management perspective, of what we're doing in these situations. Obviously, checklists for building staff. You can put glow-in-the-dark reflector tape on stairwells on the steps. You replace standard hallway fixtures with LED emergency lights. Certainly last longer. Stockpile flashlights and batteries. You can purchase portable generators to provide power to charging stations for phones and computers. However, the lobby is not the place to put this type of equipment. Again, carbon monoxide, these need to be outside. Purchase two-way talk radios for building staff and security, if that's not in place already. Create storage areas on designated floors for supplies in the event of the building loses power. It'll be easier for staff to access. Defibrillator, all right, has proven to save lives. And so these are some of the things, along with, flashlights, glow sticks, water, batteries, things like that, that should be readily accessible. The day or the time to order this type of stuff is not the day of, the day after, or the day before the storm hits, because it's just not going to get there. All right? This is stuff that should be in stock. Batteries, they do have an expiration life, but they will last several years. Bottled water, things like glow sticks, again, can last several years. The time for ordering these types of supplies cannot be the day before something's going to happen. Or for those events where you cannot time things, such as a fire or some type of flood, obviously, there's no time when all of a sudden a major event just happens, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, we need batteries, we need glow sticks, we need flashlights. And Ira, I think this is going to be a question for you, but what are the most critical preparedness activities that residents in high-rise buildings should do or know?
Wow. I would say number one is to be prepared with a plan to evacuate, but also the ability to stay at home, to shelter in place if that would be necessary, to make sure that you know the exits, as the commissioner mentioned before, that you've practiced them, you know where the staircases are, and that you've considered how you're going to communicate with your family members as well during an emergency. If they're not home with you, and you're going to need to try to find out where they are, make sure you know the various numbers and where you can get a hold of them.
Okay. A couple more questions for our panelists, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. Natural gas leaks are another high. Certainly, it's been in the news lately, and following last month's explosion and building collapses in East Harlem, which were the result of a natural gas leak. What should property managers or residents be doing to ensure this doesn't happen in their buildings?
First thing you should do is, if you smell gas, call 911. Don't think about calling. Don't say it's not my apartment. If you smell it, call 911. Let the experts come. We'll be there in 5 minutes. We'll check it out. Also, good maintenance. Make sure that your appliances are maintained well. And that's a good preventive measure. So preventive maintenance, make sure your appliances are well maintained. Make sure the building maintenance does that. But if you do smell gas, please call. We'll come and we'll check it out for you.
Okay. We all know that natural gas is a sort of a danger hidden beneath the streets of New York City, unseen and rarely noticed. There are over 6,300 miles of pipes transporting natural gas. The chief culprit, according to experts, is the perilous state of New York City's underground network, one of the oldest in the country. In 2012 alone, Con Edison and National Grid reported over 9,900 leaks in their combined systems. More than half of them were considered hazardous because of the dangers they pose to people or property, federal records show. So after the blast, federal investigators identified the leak in the gas main, but they're still not certain what caused it or if it was the source of the gas that exploded. All right, two more quick questions. Evacuation zones. What is the process for determining the actual borders of an evacuation zone following an emergency situation?
Well, I would say there are two things to consider when we talk about an evacuation zone. One is if there's a specific incident like the explosion in East Harlem, the first responders, the fire department, police department, who are going to come on scene are going to try to determine what immediate areas are dangerous for people to be in, and they're going to establish that particular zone. But one of the other zones we talk about often is the evacuation zones for a hurricane. We now have, you probably remember, zone A, B, and C. We've turned over. We have new zones 1 through 6, for areas that would be impacted by a hurricane. It's imperative, and then just reflecting back quickly on the lessons that we learned during Sandy, making sure that you know where your facility, whether your building's in a zone or not, is going to be important. Making sure that your residents understand whether or not you're in a zone. So one of the things that came up often during Sandy, especially when the mayor ordered an evacuation of Zone A, when the mayor of the city of New York issues an evacuation order, it's a mandatory evacuation order, and you have to leave the zone. It doesn't matter if you think your apartment is on the 8th floor and won't be inundated by water. That's not an individual preference. A mandatory evacuation means that everyone in the area has to leave, because our considerations go beyond just water in the basement. It goes to the ability for first responders to gain access to the area. The fire department that runs EMS can't very well send an ambulance to someone who calls with chest pain when the blocks around your building are surrounded by water, even if you're not. So it's imperative to know that an evacuation zone, if your building's an evacuation zone, it's not just because there's going to be damage to your building, but also because of access issues that would happen after a storm. And so you have to be prepared to evacuate and make sure that everyone in your building knows that you have a plan. The building's going to close because there's an evacuation order, that you're going to clear the building and tell people to go wherever they need to go, or it could be to our shelters.
All right, I have one final question for our panelists, and then we'll open it up for some questions. Severe storms and flooding. What have you seen over the last year or so that you feel that do you feel that residential buildings are more prepared for a catastrophic storm now than prior to